Hello, and welcome to Waves of YA, a podcast focused on young adult literacy, brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Teen Literacy Work Group.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Waves of YA. Today, we have a very special guest with us. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Lyndall Clipstone, and I'm the author of Lake's Edge, Forestful, Unholy Terrors, and the upcoming Tenderly I Am Devoured.
Wonderful. I am Summer. I am the librarian at the Long Beach Island branch of OCL.
My name is Rachel. I am at the Barnegat branch of the Ocean County Library.
And today, as you know, we are interviewing author Lyndall Clipstone, who has a brand new young adult novel coming out July 1st. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that book coming out?
Sure. So Tenderly I Am Devoured is a standalone romantic folk horror. And it's about a girl who agrees to marry the god worshipped by her isolated coastal hometown in order to save her family from financial ruin. But after her betrothal goes terribly wrong, the only way she can save herself is by working with her arrogant rival and his alluring older sister.
That sounds great. I think we'll talk a little bit about your new novel, and then we can talk about your novels that are already out, because I'm sure we have lots of questions about both. So your newest novel, Tenderly I Am Devoured, what was the inspiration for that?
So all my other books that I've written so far have been very gothic fantasy kind of based, and I really felt like doing something different this time. I wanted to move more towards something that felt a little bit more grounded in the real world, I guess, which is kind of a silly thing to say for a book where someone's marrying a god, but I wanted to sort of lean more into the horror aspect and play around with a sort of dark academia, horror, romance kind of mix. And one of the biggest inspirations was the movie Midsummer, because I really loved how it was a horror, but it was set in the summer and it was all sort of brightly lit and very floral, and I like the idea of trying to experiment with something like that in a book, which is why I like to call Tenderly I'm Devoured a flower threaded horror. So yeah, that was one of the big inspirations.
That's beautiful. So when you say grounded in reality, is this book a fantasy that's set in the real world as opposed to a fantasy set in a fantasy world?
It's a second world setting that is very similar to our world. So basically the setting is a mix up of, I would say, like fantasy, like England-ish. The setting I had in my head when I was writing it was Cornwall because of the coastal setting and the cliffs and that sort of thing. But I wanted to make it very much its own thing rather than having to set it in a particular geographical location or a particular time. So it is not our world, but it's very similar to our world, I think.
And you mentioned a little hint at two love interests in this book, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a polyamorous romance, which is so much fun to write. I always love to play around with doing a broad range of romantic experiences in my books because it's just something that I really enjoy as a writer. And I think when I was a teen reader, books that had diverse romantic representation in them were always very meaningful to me, especially books with queer reps. So I think getting to write a queer polyamorous romance was very important for so many reasons. So yeah, I guess the main character, Lark, is betrothed to a god, but the main romance is between her and the two siblings who are helping her. So there's Alistair, who was her first love, has become her heartbreak, and now they are kind of having to reluctantly work together. And Camille, his older sister, who was once her childhood friend but has been away from where they live and has now come back. So they're sort of reconnecting as adults.
Wow. Is there sibling rivalry going on as well, or are they cool with it?
So that was the thing. I really wanted to write a romance that kind of emphasized this unconditionality of love, because Lark's overarching character arc is that she's been at this boarding school where she has a very, very clear vision of what she wants to do for the future. She wants to graduate and go into this really exclusive art curation program. But then at the start of Tenderly Am Devoured, she's been expelled. And so throughout the book, we find out what's happened to make her basically lose everything that she was working for. So she's kind of lost her dream, lost her hope for the future. She comes home, finds her family in ruin, and she's sort of in this situation where she feels like she's really lost everything, doesn't feel worthy of love. She feels like a failure. And so I wanted to sort of have her fall into this romance where it really showed how even if we're flawed and make mistakes and fail and not getting a future that we'd sort of hoped to work towards, we're still worthy of love. So there's a really fun scene in the book where she and Camille have this conversation, and Camille's talking about how their father had always tried to pit her and Alistair against each other and encourage them to compete because he wanted them to sort of be kind of fighting to be the top sibling. And so she's like, we've never competed with each other because it was our only way of rebelling against our father to sort of, you know, we wouldn't let him make us enemies of ourselves. So we're not jealous of each other for both caring for you. And I thought that was an interesting way to kind of subvert this idea of like a love triangle, which you often see in YA romances. So it was really fun to write.
I completely agree about love triangles. I was always frustrated, especially when I was a teenager reading those. Like, don't get me into the whole Twilight, Edward Bella Jacob thing. I'm very firm in my opinions about that. But I have seen a little bit of a trend. I don't know if it's a trend, but in YA romance, I've seen a couple novels that have polyamorous relationships in them. And I was wondering if it's going to be a renaissance of YA in a way, to see this new take on the romance. Especially because a triangle only makes sense if triangle is 3.
Yeah.
If it's only 2 people liking one person, it would be an arrow. So,
and what's called a love triangle, I guess, is more of an arrow because it's usually two male love interests in love with a female love interest.
And she has to pick one.
And like, that's fine. I think it can work. You can do really clever things with it. I think the best love triangles are where you really don't know who you want them to choose. Like, both sides are just offering something so wonderful, and you really feel the character being torn between the two. But I'm such a terrible decision maker in my own life that I don't think I can put myself through having to write a story where a character does that. So although that said, I suppose in my first duology there was a little bit of a love triangle, but it was between a girl and a mortal and a god. So I suppose that's kind of a little different. But
yeah,
in terms of the Renaissance, I love that idea. I really hope so. I hope that we're heading towards this idea of more unique and interesting and going back into the days of, you know, like the early 2000s sort of way where there were these really interesting literary stories. I keep thinking about Bones and All by Camille DeAngelis, which is one of my favorite books, which is about, there was a movie adaptation recently, so people may know about it, but it was about teenage cannibals falling in love, and you just think, this is so cool. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there has been a trend of romance being blended with other genres, like horror or mystery, or obviously fantasy for the big romantasy genre that's happening. And I don't know, I think that really opens up the space for people to do really interesting things in their books.
Definitely. The 2 I was thinking of with the poly relationships were Iron Widow, and there's a book called This Fatal Kiss.
Yeah,
which is on my TBR.
I really wanted to read This Fatal Kiss. Alicia, the author, is actually Australian as well. So
really?
Yeah, she's written I really, really loved her first book, which is like a sapphic enemies to lovers romance. I think the heroine's bisexual, but it's like a girl falling in love with a witch. And it was really, really, really well done. She has such a beautiful way of writing. Yeah, I was trying to think about others. In the Ravenous Dark by Adrienne Strickland is another really good poly romance. She also writes asexual rap really, really well. And I know I have friends who that sort of rap in books is particularly important to them. And Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton is another. It's kind of like a queer platonic poly romance. And I love that book so much. It's really well done and a really interesting kind of take on a romance sort of dynamic.
Rachel, would you like to ask the next question about Tenderly I Am Devoured?
Yeah. What are you most excited for people to experience in your new book?
I'm just really excited for everybody to enter the world and meet the characters and see how the story plays out. It's such a personal and meaningful book to me. A lot of it was inspired by experiences in my own life, particularly like my experiences in academia and experiences with friendship breakups as a teen. So I'm looking forward to readers hopefully feeling, I don't know, a scene or a sense of connection with the book. But also, it's just been such a long sort of journey of the book just belonging solely to me. And I feel like the characters have just lived in my head for so long that I'm really excited for them to get out in the world and for everybody to sort of connect with them and engage with the story.
It's really cool. You mentioned your background in academia. What was your background in academia and how does it transfer into the new novel?
So I was an English lit student. I did a creative writing honors year and then I did an English lit PhD. But halfway through, my father got really, really sick and I kind of that and just academia not really suiting my personality and interests. I kind of had this big moment where, much like Lark in the book, I'd had this very, very clear vision of what I wanted. I was going to do a PhD. I was going to work in academia. I wanted to be an English lecturer. And then after about 3 years, I kind of realized this is not going to work out at all. I'm not suited for this. I'm not going to have a complete thesis in time. So I ended up withdrawing, but it was quite a difficult and emotional experience to have to say that I couldn't finish because I'd been so perfectionistic and driven up until that point and really was used to sort of forcing myself through that it actually took a lot of strength to be able to do the opposite and just realize that I needed to step back rather than continue pushing myself. So yeah, I think my experience of having a really clear vision of what I wanted and wanting to belong to this particular system and then having to walk away from it was really emotionally difficult. And I'm really glad where I've ended up now as an author, but I really enjoyed being able to explore those emotions through writing Lark's experience in Devoured as well.
That's wonderful. Would you like to merge into talking about some of your other books right now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I know Rachel especially has some questions about Lake's Edge.
Yeah, I just finished reading Lake's Edge and I loved it. It was definitely unique from other YA books I've read recently, but that was good. I loved it. 5 stars. It was really good.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
My first question is, what was your hardest scene to write in that book?
I think the part that I had the most difficulty with was the setup for the ending, which is probably hard to talk about without being a spoiler, but there was just all of these little moving pieces around. The basic premise of the book is that the main character, Violetta, falls in love with Rowan, who is a monstrous boy suffering from a curse. And she decides to make a bargain with the Lord of the Dead to try and save him. So when the book really gets to that pinch point where she has to try and make this bargain, getting all of the bits to work of the bargain, how is she going to do it? How is it going to play out? What are the sort of rules around the magic involved? there were so many different endings and so many different versions and so many back and forths with my agent while I was trying to work out how to fit it all together. And I really, really love how the scene ended up. But I do remember there being so many really stressful days of trying to sort of get it all to work and thinking, why did I decide to make a magic bargain? I think I've still got a piece of paper where like I'd drawn out how the magic system worked and how the bargain was going to fit into it and all of that sort of thing. So it was a fun challenge. I love to try and challenge myself with something new and big every time I write a book. And that was definitely one of the hardest ones for Lake's Edge.
That ending definitely like got me. It was definitely not how I thought it was, trying to be spoiler free. It was definitely not how I thought it was going to end, but that's not a bad thing. But I haven't read book 2 yet. So now I have to read book 2 because I need to find out what happens now after you left it on a cliffhanger.
It was such a cliffhanger ending. I feel sort of sorry, but also it was really fun to write a cliffhanger ending. I think it's my only duology that I've ever written. So I've sort of had to really take advantage of that by making everybody sort of stressed at the end.
So when you wrote the book, was the intention for there to be a second book, or when you got to the end were you like, oh, there needs to be a second book?
I'd sort of been thinking about it. So it went on submission as a standalone with series potential, which I think was usually how things were sort of pitched back then when I was working on that. And I had a few sort of calls with editors that didn't eventuate in offers where they had some feedback about, oh, I think I'd like the story to go deeper and I'd like to see more of this and more of that. And do you have any ideas about how you could expand that? And I remember saying to one of them, oh, well, maybe it would work better as a duology. And they were sort of like, no. And I was like, okay, well, perhaps this editor who was already reluctant to take on the book didn't want to hear from me. Like, what if you take 2 books? And it did end up selling it as a standalone. And it was originally written as a standalone. But when I sold the book, I sold it as a 2-book deal. And I'd kind of just, in my naivety, assumed that I would just come up with a second book for them. And I kept saying to my editor, do you want to see like my idea for a second book? Which that idea was what eventually became Unholy Terrors, which is my 3rd book. But I asked her and she said, oh, we were actually thinking of making it into a duology. And as I was doing my first round of revisions with her at the time, the thought of having a whole second book to play out with all of these other ideas really just opened up so many things. So it allowed me to really deepen the relationship between Letta and the Lord Under, which I didn't really have room to play with in a single book. And that had always sort of disappointed me a bit. I was like, I really wanted to add more there. And I really wanted to show more of the world below, which is like the underworld in the book. And so, yeah, adding an extra book allowed me to do that. So it wasn't originally set up as a series, but I feel like it works so well that I'm glad that I got the opportunity to expand it.
I was just going to say really quick that I love duologies. I think they have a really nice symmetry to them. You know, I mean, I love a trilogy too, but I just feel like there's a real nice open close to a duology. You know, there's no meandering.
And I think it worked really well with Lake's Edge and Forestfall because it's a story that's very much set up. You know, there's like the world above, the world below. There's the sort of the Lord Under, and then the lady above, who's kind of like the goddess figure. And so having this book where there's a lot of dualities, then having like the actual book be 2 books as well, it really thematically worked so well.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that the original intention for Lake's Edge was to be a standalone. And if you left it at that ending, I think that's kind of cruel.
No, the cliffhanger ending was, I changed that when I knew that it was going to be a duology.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay, phew.
Yeah, so
Okay,
I think, I can't even remember. I mean, the original ending was always kind of the same, but it just took a lot longer to get there when I expanded it into a second book. So there was a lot about it that really didn't sort of fit into one volume. So I guess if it had been a standalone, it would have had a more obvious conclusion, but I don't think it would have felt as rich and satisfying.
I agree.
So we have your duology, and then Unholy Tyrants is a standalone. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is Tenderly I Am Devoured intended to be a standalone or the start of a series? Or can you not tell us?
It's a standalone as well. I found after writing a duology that I much prefer writing standalones. That's sort of where my headspace is at. I think because I tend to lean more literary with my writing, I feel like the things I enjoy exploring in stories work a lot better in just a single volume. But I'll never say never. I mean, I might get an idea for a series one day in the future, but at the moment I'm really enjoying just having standalones and getting a chance to do something new with every book.
Wonderful. Rachel, would you like to continue with Lake's Edge?
Yeah. I was wondering, because as I was reading, I mean, your characters in Lake's Edge are very unique. They each have their own personality, and they're just characters that I haven't found in like any other romance novel or YA novel. So I just wanted to know how you approach developing all your characters, especially the Lord Under and Violetta.
The Lord Under is probably one of my favorite. No, I think Rowan's my favorite character, or one of my favorite characters that I've ever written. He was just immense fun to write. But with the Lord Under, I think I really wanted to write a model figure interacting with a human and sort of seeing how their different worldviews lined up, because he's got this whole different level of ethics because he's not human, and she's approaching him with this very earnest human-based view of the world. And when they come together and she's sort of trying to negotiate with him, it's really interesting, I think, seeing the conflict in their personalities there, because I wanted to write I suppose, like a villain who was more than just a villain. So he is the antagonist, but he's not just there to be evil for no kind of reason. It's more his evilness just is in his fundamental nature. Like, he's not deliberately trying to be malicious. He's just doing his thing. He's the Lord of the Dead. He operates on bargains. He's very, I don't know, I think it was fun writing him because of that, and seeing how he has this connection to a human girl, and the way that then starts to become almost a flaw for him, because she's unsettling this immortality that he's built up for himself, this very strict worldview where he feels very secluded in it, and it's very all or nothing. And then she comes in and completely unsettles everything for him. So I guess that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that I really wanted to write a villain that felt complicated and interesting. And at the time, I'd been reading the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo, and I suppose I had a lot of Darkling feelings at the time, because he was such an interesting villain, and the complexity and the way that she'd written him as being sort of so sympathetic while also clearly being an antagonist was something that I loved the idea of exploring. And as a Violetta, I wanted to write a character who wasn't a chosen one. So she's kind of the one without magic. She's the older sister of the chosen one, in a sense. Like, her brother Arian is the one who has the magic that Rowan needs to help his curse, and she's kind of just coming along in a protective sort of role. And I remember there being like a really annoyed review of Lake's Edge where someone said, oh, the whole book could have been better if Arian was the main character. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the point. The point is that she's not the chosen one. Like, there's so many books out there with the main character being the one who's got the power to do all of the things. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have a character from the start who really has no power except her own kind of force of will, and seeing what she does with that was really fun for me as a writer, I think.
It's really cool. I totally agree. I feel like as much as we love the Chosen One stories, it is very interesting to see a character who is not. And I think, is it because we want to see ourselves as being special or being chosen, and seeing the characters who aren't is relatable in a way we're not ready to face. I don't know. I'm getting too philosophical about it.
I don't know. I feel like as a reader, I always enjoy that a little bit too, where the sort of underdog character, I suppose she's very flawed and she's very messy and she makes a lot of bad decisions. And I really loved that because as a teenager, I too made a lot of bad decisions and was very flawed and messy. So I felt quite emotional writing this YA book with such a human, flawed, very teenage girl mindset protagonist.
I love an unhinged character, personally.
Through the novel, I was almost, I hate to say, like getting annoyed with Violetta with how protective she was over Arian. It's like if I had a nickel like every time she said I want to keep everyone safe, I'd be rich. It's like,
I mean,
it's like
yeah.
I love that she was protective. It's just, oh my gosh, girlfriend, let your brother live his life. He wants to do this.
I know. And I think that's the thing. Like, it's intended to be not completely sympathetic. She is annoying and she is completely overprotective because she's in this world where she has so little control that she's clung to her brother and sort of thrown everything into protecting him, but in a way that it's kind of like, does he even want to be protected that much? I don't think he does. And I really enjoyed the scene where she's trying to encourage him to run away from like such a state. She's like, we have to leave, we have to go. And he's like, actually, no, I want to stay here because even though it's not safe, I feel like this is where I can finally be myself. And she has this sort of moment of like, oh, okay, I've tried to protect you, but maybe that's actually harmed you in another way. And there's also this really lovely moment where he gets really angry with her and he says, you do all of these things to try and keep everyone safe, but what about you? What's going to happen to you? And I think her martyrdom and her self-sacrifice is very much a character flaw. And I think it does come across as frustrating for the reader because it is a frustrating trait. I don't think it's meant to be set up as something positive. I think her big character arc is sort of learning to be less of a, I was going to say control freak. I'm not sure if she is controlling though, less overprotective of everyone she loves, to sort of loosen her hold on things and trust that everything will be okay.
So was there anything that you actually, this could go for either book, anything that was initially meant to be in the final edit of the book that had to be edited out, that you, for any reason, either if you wished that it stayed or if there was a good reason for it?
Yeah, so in Tenderly Am Devoured, this is such a small thing, but Camille, the female love interest, she was originally going to be like a frustrated pianist where she'd really wanted to have like a career as a musician and it hadn't worked out. And there was this really lovely scene where they were all sort of sitting at a piano together, sort of playing. She was playing and her brother was sort of joining in and Lark was sitting between them, and it absolutely served no purpose to the book whatsoever, and it just didn't work in terms of the pacing. Like I was trying to really create this sense of winding up of tension and impending doom, and having them all sit down and play the piano together didn't really fit, so I had to cut that. But it was such a fun, just cozy hanging out in the library playing the piano sort of scene that I feel very fond about it, even though it didn't make it into the final version of the book.
An alternate reality where that happened.
Yeah, maybe that can be like the bonus material for like a future paperback or something.
That's awesome.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what research you conducted for, we'll say, any of your books, anyone you want to talk about, and did you uncover anything surprising or fascinating?
Really, I think for me, a lot of my research is in consuming other media. So reading other books, watching films, that sort of thing, more than, I suppose, really researching anything. I don't know. I'm not really like a big one of those authors who really, really gets into research, although I always sort of look at people who do and feel kind of a little bit like, oh, that would be so fun to really love doing that. I think probably the most interesting thing that I did for Tenderly I Am Devoured was I invented a language. So there is a in-world kind of literature canon, which is very loosely based on the classic literature, like in Latin and things like that. But because it wasn't grounded in the real world, I couldn't have them speaking Latin because it didn't make any sense. So I invented a language called Tharnish, which is kind of like a mix between Latin and Cornish, I suppose. It's like fake fake Latin that they use in world. And Alistair, his favorite book is this book that's written in Tharnish. So he's kind of like this nerdy dark academia boy walking around with this book in a dead language, which is supposed to be, I guess, an expression of how he's closed himself off from the world so much that he doesn't even want to read anything that's from the modern era. But yeah, putting that together, it was only a few phrases, but that was a really fun process of choosing the words and choosing the phrases and thinking about how a pretend dead language would operate in their world.
That is really cool. I'm just getting more and more excited to read Tenderly I Am Devoured. You said you consume a lot of other media while you are in the process of writing your book. Do you have any young adult book recommendations that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yes, I have a few that I really, really adore. Winter Song by S.J. Jones, which was one of the first Gothic YA books that I read and one of the first books that really encouraged me to write the sort of stories that I wanted to write. Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton, which I think I already mentioned. That's this really, really cool. It's got kind of like Lake's Edge vibes a bit, where it's like a girl at the edge of a forest and there's like a weird monster and she has to sort of do things to save the village, but it's very unique and beautifully written. And then there's House of Thorns by Isabel Streakash, which is a contemporary kind of horror fantasy with huge Mike Flanagan vibes. So if you ever liked The Haunting of Hill House, you would absolutely love this book. It's so beautifully written. It's so clever. She does really, really interesting things with narrative timelines, which was one of the things that I read that inspired me to try playing with the dual timelines in Tenderly I'm Devoured. And Bones and All by Camille De Angelis, which is, I think I mentioned that already as well. It's about teenage cannibals on a road trip, which I really love. I think it was just a very interesting story in so many ways. I'm vegetarian, and so I really love things that interrogate like the ethics of eating. And I think from memory, veganism or something might have been one of the inspirations that the author, so I'm knowing, like, I'm reading that in the acknowledgements and knowing that that was the lens she looked at it through, I thought that was really interesting too. And the final book is Deep in Provenance by Rhys M. Nielsen, which is a beautifully written contemporary fantasy about 4 girls who are dealing with grief and growing up and all of these sort of things. And it's set in Providence, Rhode Island. So I think anyone who lives there would probably really, really enjoy reading it. But I, living on the other side of the world, also really enjoyed reading it. Rhys is just a beautiful writer. She's very talented, and it's really, really clever, beautiful story.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to recommend a book to you now. If you've read it already, stop me, because I literally just finished reading it like this week. It is called The Coven Tendency by Zoe Hannah Makuta, I think.
I haven't, but I've heard of it.
It is crazy. I'm still thinking, like, the ending was so, it wasn't where I thought it was going at all. And again, it's not set in our world. It doesn't go very deep into the world building because it's not about the exterior world. It's about the interior world of these witches who, in this universe, the witches are theorized to have been born with magic due to nature revolting against modernization. Sort of like industrialization has made nature grow inside people. And this magic sort of makes them go insane slowly.
Oh, wow.
So when they're young, there's these three families of witches that live in this sort of estate that people can pay to visit, almost like an experience. And then the front of their houses are one-way mirrors. So you can look in, but they can't look out. So it's almost like a zoo. And their magic is taken away when they're children. So the effects are a little less. They haven't gone fully insane yet, but a lot of them do have some issues that they get into, and the parents are slowly deteriorating, and they are aware that one day they will be killed and their children will take their place as what's called spectacles. And they perform these gruesome magical spectacles for a profit that people can come to see. And it's very graphic. There's a lot of trigger warnings, but you seem to be okay with graphic horror.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to look that up. I love books like that. That's the thing I'm always searching for, especially in YA books that really do something different and push in terms of being more mature or like graphic content or just interesting storylines. I love finding books like that.
And there are dual timelines as well, which sort of is a little, first I was a little confused, but then I got it together. And again, the ending, I'm still like, what happened? Excuse me, what? So that's my recommendation to you.
Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look that one up. It sounds amazing.
In your books, do you hide any Easter eggs that people can find?
So in Tenderly, Am Devoured, there is an epilogue scene that connects to a short story that I wrote, which is in this anthology called The Crawling Moon by Neon Hemlock. So I wrote a short story in that called Cryptophagia, which is an adult dark academia short story about a young man who is a curator of artworks, and he goes to the house of a painter who he was researching and is interviewing his children about the artist's work. And there's a little Easter egg to that in the end of Tenderly, Am Devoured. So they're sort of set in the same universe. So that was a lot of fun. I think it probably amuses me and maybe like no one else, but I really, really had fun with that. And I think it would be cool if anyone sort of reads both of them and can make the connection.
I'm sure someone will, because have you ever read the author Laini Taylor?
Yes.
In her duology, Strange the Dreamer, at the very end, there's like one sentence, but my brain was like, aha, because it connects to another series of hers. So I'm sure someone will see it.
Well, yeah, hopefully. That was kind of what I wanted to do. I think just it added this little extra layer of meaning. I'm just like, oh, and that's sort of what a fun way to kind of connect the two. So yeah, that's my little Easter egg for them.
And lastly, we asked what books you read during your research, for lack of a better word. Do you have anything else? It could be books, it could be movies, authors that inspire you in your writing.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of the authors that are inspiring me lately are probably not YA authors. I've been reading a lot out of my genre just because that helps my headspace, I suppose, when I'm working on YA. But my all-time favorite author, which probably will surprise no one, is Donna Tartt, particularly The Secret History. I read it at such a pivotal moment in my life, and there's so many things about that book that's just been such a constant source of inspiration. I really, really love Emma Cline, especially The Girls, and she just writes young women so beautifully and really captures that kind of burgeoning queerness. Like, my favorite stories by her, The Girls does it really well, and she's also got a short story in her collection, Daddy, about like a girl who's clearly kind of got a crush on her best friend and is processing the feelings. And there's just something really, really beautiful and brutal about the way she writes girlhood that I love. And Roshani Chokshi, especially Last Tale of the Flower Bride, I just absolutely adore her prose. She writes these beautiful, lush Angela Carter kind of style fairy tales, and I love all of her work, but Last Tale of the Flower Bride, I think, really just had so many elements that appealed to me. I loved the unreliable narrator, and again, that's like another book that's got dual timelines, and it was just this very Grimm's fairy tale kind of magical horror. I don't know, so many different things that I loved. And my last favorite author that I can think of at the moment is Mona Awad, who wrote Bunny. And my favorite book by her is actually Rouge, which is wellness horror, which is a genre that I really, really enjoy, strangely enough. Like, I'm not sure why. There's just something about wellness horror that I really am loving this year. But I don't know. I loved Bunny a lot. I'm so excited for the prequel sequel that's coming out in September. Yeah. Oh, that's going to be so good.
I think on her Instagram, she said it's both a prequel and a sequel.
That's
somehow.
So exciting. I know that whatever it is, it's going to be amazing because I just adore her writing so much. But Rouge was just so weird and so beautiful. And it had this really touching mother-daughter relationship and this search for belonging and this idea of this girl growing up in the shadow of like a really, really overbearing, beautiful mother trying to sort of come into herself. And it's also got like this weird demon that looks like Tom Cruise. I don't know. I love it. It's just, she's so wild and wacky. I love her books so much. She seems to manage to straddle this line between like very, very artistic, prosy, art house kind of things, but also like hilariously strange and funny. So yeah, that's another book that I really, really adore.
I feel like we have a very similar taste in books, you and I. I also loved Mona Awad. I haven't read Rouge yet, but I loved Bunny and All's Well. And yeah, I also love Donna's. Really I also love Donna's Heart. Secret History is one of the books I've read at least like 4 times. Me and my best friend from high school have a deep connection to the secret history we share with each other.
Oh, I love that so much. I know it's so rereadable and it's such a comfort read, which is so funny when you think about it's such a stressful story, but there's just something about dipping back in and out of the book. And sometimes I'll sort of start rereading it and I won't finish, or I'll pick it up and read certain sections. But I think there's something about that book that there's a lot of people out there who've just really connected with it at a particular time.
Lyndall, is there anything further you'd like to talk about, questions you'd like to ask us, or personal epiphanies?
No, just thank you for having me. This was really fun to chat. I have so much fun talking about my books, and I'm excited to chat with you guys at the library. And yeah, I'm really excited for Tenderly Am Devoured to be out in the world on July 1st, and for everybody to get to meet the characters and enter the world and enjoy my weird made-up fake Latin that I wrote for it.
We're very excited for the book to come out, and for everybody listening, by the time this podcast is out, the book will be out, and you can get it at the library or at your local bookstore. And yes, we are very excited. Thank you, Lyndall, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All titles mentioned in today's episode can be found through the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.